John, thanks so much for joining us.
Happy to be here, Jenny.
Here it is, the report on the ATF's Project Gunrunner, all 138 pages. And I'll tell you, the Inspector General, he certainly had a hard time finding anything good to say about the ATF's program. And he really went after them for everything from lack of communication to focusing on small gun sales rather than going after the big guys. What's your take on it?
Well, I think you're exactly right. It's a very critical report. It has a lot of concern about how ATF runs its operations on Mexican gun trafficking. And while any good American citizen would like to see enforcement efforts be effective, I think the report makes clear that there's a lot of room for improvements.
A lot of room, and it also goes back to that whole 90% myth that we took apart, but it really supports what the NRA is saying, because the report points out that although the number of trace requests from Mexico has increased since 2006, most seized guns in Mexico's aren't traced, and part of the reason, no doubt, is because senior Mexican law enforcement authorities that they interviewed for the report don't view gun tracing as an important investigative tool.
Right, and that is an important point in the report. A lot of the time in the United States, we regard gun tracing as almost an end in itself, or at least some in the law enforcement world regard it as such. But I think that may be a bit of a case of if your only tool is a hammer, all your problems look like nails. If you find a gun at a crime scene in Mexico and trace it, well, that might lead you to someone who may or may not have illegally sold the gun or stolen the gun in the United States. It doesn't solve necessarily the crime in Mexico, who actually committed the shooting, for example.
And I think what really stands out in that whole part about, in the report about tracing, it talks about how most trace requests from Mexico have not been successful, and in fact, the success rate has declined since the start of Project Gunrunner.
Right. They've gotten the Mexican authorities to submit more trace requests, but quantity can't beat quality. So the problem is that they're getting more trace requests, but the requests are often too late or too incomplete. There are cases of the Mexican authorities submitting guns for tracing 3 years after seizure. There's a big problem in timely access to tracing, because the Mexican government has a policy that all guns seized by the police have to be turned over immediately to the military, and then the military will give access. Well, and then ATF, of course, says that one of the problems is lack of access to the guns, but they don't really need the guns necessarily if they can get accurate information about the guns.
But it points right back to what Fred Burton of Stratfor Intelligence Agency was talking to me about, and this was a year ago. And he said, it all comes down to that you can make this data look in whatever direction you like, as President Calderon does, and even President Obama does in pursuing their own agenda. And he said, you know what? You only know what they want you to know. And this report really summarizes is that they don't know.
That's right. And tracing can be useful, and it would be more useful if it were conducted on a more reliable basis, not just in terms of tracing as many guns as possible, but in tracing the guns that can be traced, and where a trace will be conducted in a timely manner and used for a really direct, targeted purpose.
Mm-hmm. I know you've really looked at this report. I haven't had a chance to read through, but it really is quite a startling report. When they have a whole area in there that you pointed out to me when we were talking earlier about gun sales. And one thing it talks about is how Project Gunrunner's focus has remained on gun dealer inspections and straw purchasers, rather than, as I said, going after the high-level traffickers, the smugglers.
Right. Well, and it would be legitimate to look at sales at retail sales and straw purchasers as part of trying to find the high-level traffickers. The question is whether that's been done effectively as well.
And it talks about how the agents that they talk to are frustrated by this. And I know when I've talked with sheriff deputies and sheriffs around the country, and especially on the border areas, they'll tell me the agents are very frustrated. They feel like their hands are tied, and I think the report also points to that. But do you think when they talk about how they only deal with, as they talk, like small gun shops, small gun sales, that they're pointing out that, hey, you know, it may be the easy road to go, but we're looking for the big guys because that's what's going to make the difference.
Mm-hmm. Right, and you know, and obviously it takes a lot of work. There's a lot of paperwork involved. There's a lot of combing through records during dealer inspections, for example, and you would be led there by, again, effective tracing. So it comes back to that again, looking for quality rather than quantity.
And you mentioned paperwork, and the report also talks about the lack of reporting requirements for multiple sales of long guns.
Right, and the issue here is that federal law requires a dealer who sells 2 or more handguns within a 5 business day period to report that sale to BATFE. And the government can then use that to see if there's anything worth following up on an investigation. You know, is it a person making a type of purchase that might be suspicious versus someone who's looking to equip himself for to conduct a training class for a large group of students, or a collector buying a matched set of guns and that kind of thing. One of the interesting points in the report of those, they complain that this is not required for long guns. Well, Congress didn't require it for long guns because long guns are less likely to be used in crime than handguns, and also because the Gun Control Act of '68, when it was originally passed, was really intended to facilitate enforcement of state handgun laws. But the other aspect of this is that ATF says in its response to the report that they agree with the recommendation to push for a multiple sales report requirement for long guns. So a person who wants to buy a deer rifle for himself and for his granddaughter, for example, would have to fill out a multiple sales report, and that would go into the government. And what's particularly interesting is that BATFE says that a change in the Gun Control Act may be necessary to do this. So I think it's pretty clear that it would definitely be necessary, because if Congress had wanted to require multiple sales reporting for all guns, Congress could have done that. Congress has never done that, however. And
you can see the anti-gunners, the Brady campaign, seizing on this one.
That's right, and well, we've seen it promoted previously, and talked about in responses to in other news coverage in recent months as well.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they move forward with that, though.
It'll be very, very interesting to see if and how they move forward.
But when you look at the whole report, what you walk away from this, you've got President Calderon and you've got our own President Obama. They keep pointing at the U.S., they keep blaming gun owners, they keep blaming our Second Amendment, and this really points to a much bigger problem. And it is, I think, in the hands of Mexico for the most part. What they don't want us to know, what they don't want to do, they don't like tracing, and yet it's always our fault.
Right. So one of the paradoxes of the Mexico issue is that we get blamed for their problems on the demand side for drugs, and on the supply side for guns. It's never the other way around.
And it's about making it harder for the gun dealer to stay in business, and that it'll be real interesting. That's a real important point that you pointed out there.
Right.
All righty. Stay tuned, right?
Absolutely. We will definitely be hearing more about this report.
All right. Thanks so much, John.
You're very welcome, Jenny. Always a pleasure.